Welcome back to Pandemic Pass. I'm your host, Casey Siddons, and for this second part of episode 3, I sit down with Dr. Ozek, first and foremost a parent, but secondly, he is also a principal researcher with, wait for it, the Analysis of Longitudinal Data in Education Research Program at the American Institutes for Research. Whew, that's a mouthful. He's a really smart guy, and you can find him on Twitter at Uozek. Dr. Ozek's research interests include immigrant students, the implementation and consequences of educational accountability, design and effects of school choice programs, and value-added measurement. Honestly, I don't think I could have found a better person to talk to as it pertains to what this podcast is all about: COVID, education, and this particular episode, parents. We talk about his experience as a parent firsthand in dealing with the pandemic at home with his own children. His own children attend Fairfax County Public Schools in Fairfax County, Virginia, and with over 185,000 students enrolled, Fairfax County Public Schools is actually the largest public school system in Virginia and actually the 12th largest in the nation. We also chat about how he views these challenges from his various perspectives as an immigration and education researcher, and obviously a parent. Dr. Ozek, as I mentioned, he's a really bright guy, and I was really privileged to have him join me. I actually had to have him on twice because the first time I recorded the interview, something happened with technology and the interview disappeared into the ether. So I'm so appreciative of his time, and I hope you enjoy the chat that we have, because he brings in a really great perspective to this discussion about how parents are dealing with this COVID epidemic, this pandemic, and how we need to really critically think about how our parents are impacted and how they can really continue to be essential stakeholders in how we improve our public education system and really come out of this pandemic stronger. This is part 2 of episode 3 of Pandemic Pass. Thank you for joining us. This is called Parents and COVID, and I'll see you on the other side. Dr. Ozek, thank you again for joining us. The listeners won't know this, but we had to come back again because of technical issues. So it's good to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, and one of the ways in which I came to know your work is through Twitter. Obviously, in a good space. There's a lot of trolls out there, and you're not one of them. And I'm glad that I found you on Twitter. You shared your experiences with COVID as a parent trying to manage what I'm calling the dance of going from virtual learning to in-person learning. Can you tell us about your experience thus far and what you shared?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about what we experienced in Fairfax County, where we tried to switch from a fully virtual system to a hybrid system. And this was a gradual switch, starting with the kids most in need of in-person learning, like kids with special needs, and kids in early grades, kindergartners, first graders, second graders. I mean, this plan has been in place since the beginning of the fall semester. So the district said, based on these health metrics, if things go well, we will gradually moving kids from all virtual to this hybrid system where some kids will go to school 2 days a week,
right.
And then they will have 2 other days at home with the same teacher. And they also gave parents the option to choose fully virtual if they're not comfortable sending their kids to school. So those were the options. And around mid October or so, they rolled out another parent survey to see if our preferences had changed since the beginning of the school year. And then obviously, we know what happened in the past couple of weeks with the numbers skyrocketing in Virginia and in many other places. They had to abandon this plan.
Right.
And, in that tweet, what I basically mentioned was that difficulty or the challenges that teachers, kids, and parents had to face because of this, uncertainty and change of plans. And I mean, obviously, I'm not blaming anybody. This is an unfortunate situation. And with the numbers going up, I don't think many parents would be comfortable sending their kids to school, or teachers wouldn't be comfortable going into the school. But I mean, those challenges are, for example, for kids. There was a huge heartbreak for many kids who were hoping to go to school in person, and meeting their teachers in person and their friends in person. And another thing was that in order to accommodate the new choices of parents, principals and the district had to shuffle some students between classrooms.
Yeah.
And which is a disruption, especially 3 months into the school year.
Right.
And that's especially hard for kids in early grades, where it's hard for teachers to understand the kids' needs, and it's hard for the kids to understand the teaching philosophy, or what's happening, the routine. I mean, the routine is very important for all kids, but this is especially true for younger kids. For teachers, the challenge was obviously they had to go to school, they had to set up the classrooms, they had to send. They are the unfortunate ambassadors of a broken system from top to bottom, basically.
Right.
I mean, they're the ones who have to deal with parents on a daily basis and deal with their complaints and issues. I mean, with all that going on, they had to go to classrooms, they had to set everything up, and they have these new students coming in. So that was a big disruption for teachers as well. And for parents, obviously, especially for those who chose to send their kids to school for 2 days, they perhaps had to make some new arrangements for childcare. Maybe they had to make some arrangements work-wise. And with this cancellation, all those plans basically had to change one more time.
Yeah, and with the school district that's, 12th and largest in the nation, there's almost 190,000 students. I mean, it seems like just a major shift in policy and practice right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Fairfax County is a big district, and we must also consider the fact that it's one of the wealthiest counties in nationwide. So the district has perhaps more resources than many other districts nationwide. So, I mean, it's really hard to generalize what's happening here in Fairfax County to other places. But yeah, I mean, the challenges to different degrees are everywhere. And I guess the moral of that tweet was that unless the district is planning to switch to something that they're extremely familiar with, like an in-person full-time schooling, it might not be worthwhile to switch to anything at this point in the school year, because of all these transition costs, the costs associated with switching. And in our case, for example, I wasn't sure that it was worth sending my kid to school 2 days a week, and face all these disruptions with new teachers, new schedules, new everything, new routines for the kids. It's hard to see whether the benefits of going to school for 2 days a week for these kids. I mean, for some kids, to be honest with you, for some kids it might be worth it. I mean, for English learners, for example, for kids with special needs, for some kids in early grades, or maybe for some high schoolers in more career technical education programs. They might, I mean, it might be worth going to school because they need in-person training.
Right.
For many, I mean, switching to a hybrid system or status quo might be the best option at this point in the school year, unless you are switching to a full-time in person.
So, and I think you bring up a lot of really, really relevant points in terms of the impact on all parties. And, this particular episode is about parents and COVID-19. Mm-hmm. We know that the opportunity and achievement gaps prior to the pandemic are continuing to widen. This pandemic and online learning has certainly exacerbated these issues. With your expertise in immigration, education policy, what do you feel like is hurting our English language learner students, and what kind of things should school systems be planning for upon our eventual return?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of challenges for English learners. One is obviously English learners tend to come from more economically disadvantaged families. So access to instruction is perhaps more of an issue for English learners compared to non-English learners, because they might not have the resources to like a laptop or a tablet or proper broadband connection, or perhaps both parents are working. They have to work outside the home, so
sure.
There can be. Childcare issues might be a bigger deal for these kids. So there's that. And there's also the issue of language barriers, right, mm-hmm. for these kids and their parents in terms of accessing resources in English. That's another issue. And even when they access resources in English, there's the language barrier that makes it very difficult for these kids to obtain the education or the learning that they need.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why Fairfax County, when Fairfax County decided to gradually let students back into classrooms, English learners were one of the first categories that they let that were supposed to go back to school.
Yeah, when students are in school, even English language learners are often found to be, not necessarily forgotten in schools, but certainly they feel separated and they feel that they're not part of the community. And can you speak to maybe how students who are English language learners are feeling even in even worse situation now that they're online?
That's true, because one thing that benefits these students, based on evidence, is more personalized instruction,
sure.
based on their levels, based on their needs, based on the English language deficiencies that they have. Because there are different types of English. It's a process, right?
Yeah.
There are different components to that process. It can be speaking, it can be reading, it can be all these other issues. And without, it's hard to identify those issues remotely. It's much easier to do those things for a teacher when they're in person. And when they identify, they can provide some more personalized instruction for
sure.
these kids. And that's a big challenge for English learners, and that's also true for special education kids.
Yeah.
Without this personalized assistance, it's very difficult for them in a regular classroom setting to get what they need. Granted, teachers and districts are planning these small groups within these asynchronous learning in an asynchronous learning environment, but we really don't know how effective these are. And that's another issue, right? That's the thing we discussed last time. We predict that there's an issue. We feel like there's an issue, but we can't really know how big of an issue these are,
right.
Until we observe the outcomes.
Right.
But the other issue is that, I mean, testing or test scores are, one of the main outcomes that we use to assess where the kids are. And this year it's more challenging. I mean, last year, obviously, many states did not have standardized testing because of issues related to COVID. And this year, there's also the question of whether states will administer these tests. And without these tests and without these outcomes, it's hard to. I mean, I'm not saying tests are the perfect solution, but
it's a data point.
Yeah, it's a data point, yes. And when you use multiple data points, you can come up with a more accurate description of of the kid's achievement, right? And without those test scores, it's really hard to identify the issues, and it's really hard to identify the kids who need some sort of an intervention to get back on track.
Right.
And that's also something we need to think about when thinking about these issues and thinking about these kids in need.
So, and on that note, so as an educational researcher, what do you feel like? What do you think is going to be the big? Let's prognosticate a little bit. What do you think is going to be the big educational research that comes out of these school shutdowns?
Well,
it's a little question.
It's a very loaded question. There have been so many studies coming out since March. I mean, there's this joke in academia about the COVID wave of COVID studies. Like, like I think we are over the first wave. We passed the first peak, but I think there's a second peak coming. I mean, there are a number of things we can look at and we need to look at I mean, for practical purposes too. First, we need to identify the problem, right? Mm-hmm. We need to identify the kids who were most adversely affected by this remote learning experience and by this pandemic, and then based on that, we need to look at our toolbox to see what can we do to remedy these learning losses, these achievement gaps, and the key is obviously, just like I mentioned, is that we need outcomes to identify those things. And I mean, I should also mention that, I mean, it's really difficult to identify the causal effect of X, Y, or Z in this setting, because there's just so much going on at the same time. Right. I mean, there's the labor market, the effect on the labor market, the parents' employment, parental income, household income that's affected, obviously.
It's hard to isolate what would be the most impactful.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are a lot of challenges empirically in identifying, but even something more descriptive to at least identify the issues and then trying to come up with solutions to those issues. I mean, I think that will be very useful research for next school year, for the next school year.
Well, you got your work cut out for you for sure. You got some job security and
well, knock on wood.
Yeah, right. For everybody. Dr. Ozek, it was really a pleasure having you on. And I'm glad to have run into you on Twitter and online, because I'm sure that we got to get you back on the show again at some point. And we appreciate your time, certainly, for coming on this episode.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. Of course.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this most recent episode of Pandemic Pass. As you probably assumed by now, this is part 2 of episode 3, and keep looking out for new episodes of Pandemic Pass to come out every single Thursday, and please give us some feedback and review us. We are on Facebook, we are at edsnotdead.com, and of course you can follow us on Twitter at edsnotdeadpc. Thanks a lot, and tune in next week. Thank you for joining us on Pandemic Pass. Pandemic Pass is a pulp education production and was written and directed by me, Casey Siddons. Music was written and performed by Peter Craven. Thanks for listening. Be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find us.